What's up, plant lovers? So in the quest to create the most beautiful gardens possible, we're not just talking about what plants to put in our garden, we also need to talk about what plants to remove from our garden. And so today I wanted to talk about invasive plants, what they are, why they're harmful, and how we can actually go about removing them. So simply put, invasive species are species that have been introduced into an environment that then go forth and have negative ecological, economic, or social impacts on that environment. Sometimes these species are introduced on purpose and sometimes by accident. In the case of an accidental introduction, you can imagine a freight liner, a boat that travels across the globe that just happens to be carrying some seeds of a plant that when it lands in that new environment, for some reason or another, it really enjoys that new climate and it grows essentially uncontrollably. However, invasive species have also been introduced on purpose on many occasions. In fact, the Japanese honeysuckle, which I have all over my yard, was introduced into America on purpose in the early 1800s to be planted as a plant for erosion control. And a good example of an introduced invasive animal species was an island off of the coast of South Africa had a very bad mouse problem. So they brought over cats to come and destroy that mouse population. The cats did destroy the mouse population, but then they flourished so prolifically they began to eat all of the birds and destroyed a lot of the native bird populations on that island. So many times invasive species are introduced with a positive intention. That positive intention is often met, but then negative consequences happen further down the road. Now, what makes invasive plant life so destructive is that when these invasive plants are introduced into these new climates, for some reason they're able to adapt very well to these particular climates. And they tend to have the ability to reproduce exponentially, outcompeting all of the native plants in the area for all of the available resources. Now, while invasive plants are from foreign lands, that's not to say that all non-native plants are invasive. I grow tons of plants that aren't native to my Eastern Pennsylvania garden, such as my big leaf hydrangeas. They're not native, but they have no harmful effects to my garden or the surrounding ecosystem. Now, in terms of the environmental harm that invasive plants create, they're going to outcompete many of the native plants for all of the available resources like the sun, the nutrients in the soil, as well as the water. And as they're destroying that native plant life, what happens is they start to destroy the natural native food webs that include all of the native wildlife in your region. Once they start to outcompete those native plants and those native plants dwindle from the ecosystem, that means that there are less homes available for the native wildlife. So we need to remove all of these invasive plants to allow the native plants to grow and thrive that will then go forth and allow the native food webs to thrive as well. Invasive plants also have destructive economic impacts as well. Here you can see I have some English ivy that has taken over this tree and it's slowly but surely sucking the life out of that tree. Eventually I'm gonna have to pay to get that tree removed. That's one way that invasive plants have an economic negative impact. Also, we've heard stories about kudzu just taking over properties. Property damage from kudzu is huge, very, very expensive. Another example is the water hyacinth plant. Down in Florida, there's a few different lakes where the water hyacinth grows so prolifically that light cannot pass through the water to help provide light for the animals or other plant life to grow or thrive. And it's also so dense and so thick, boats can't even travel through that water. It's expensive to remove, it ruins the waterway, and it diminishes commercial viability of those waterways. So of course, by removing invasive plants, we're going to allow for greater biodiversity to occur in our areas, allow native plants to grow and thrive, allow native wildlife to grow and thrive, but also we're going to be creating much more beautiful gardens. You can see that the energy of these invasive plants does not match the energy of the surrounding landscapes. They're foreign plants from a foreign area and they do not meld well in the natural energy of my garden, of your garden, or anywhere else where these invasive plants might be growing. So from an aesthetic standpoint, by removing them, we can create a much better, cleaner, purer energy in our gardens, which then lends to a much more beautiful gardenscape. just one more reason to remove invasive plants. Now, the first step in removing invasive plants is actually recognizing them. Oftentimes, you can simply recognize them by their unbounded appearance. Invasive plants tend to take over. However, if that's a little too esoteric for you, I use a nice app called Picture This. Not an advertisement, simply an app that I've used for a long time to help me identify plants when I'm out and about, but it will also help you to identify invasive plants that may be in your garden, in your landscape. So once you know what plants are invasive in your garden, how do you actually get rid of them? Number one, physical, mechanical labor. Using your own arms and muscles to actually eliminate them from your garden is oftentimes the only way to do it. I spent countless hours physically removing these honeysuckles and all of these multiflora roses from my gardens with my bare brute force. It is laborious, but it is worth the effort. However, some plants you just cannot remove with your hands. I have tons of Japanese stilt grass as well. So for invasive plants that naturalize in that way, what you can do for those plants is actually mow over them with your lawnmower once every 2 weeks. And after a few years, yes, years, 3, 4, 5 years, you will eventually sap all of the energy out of that plant and it will just simply die away. But the important thing, if you are removing your invasive plants by hand, is to get as much of those root systems out of the ground as possible. Because they are invasive, they oftentimes have the uncanny ability to regenerate themselves even if you leave just a little bit of root material in that ground. Now, another way to get rid of invasive plants is through using chemical herbicides. However, I want to stress, we want to limit the use of those chemicals as much as possible and only utilize it when it is absolutely essential. One instance where it was essential for me to use, I have some honeysuckle that is like 8, 10, 12 inches around. I simply could not get them out of the ground. So what I would do, I would saw them back and then I would take a systemic herbicide and paint the top of that stump, and that chemical entered into the plant, killing the plant from the inside out. But we want to limit the use of these chemicals as much as possible because we don't want any excess chemicals either in our gardens where we are out working, where our kids are playing, our animals are having fun. We also don't want any chemicals entering into the groundwater either. So if you are considering using some chemicals, number one, ensure you know what you're trying to get rid of. Then do some research online. Once you know what the plant is, there are going to be some targeted solutions for that exact plant, utilizing chemicals in a way that is as eco-friendly as possible. And lastly, consider hiring people to give you a helping hand. Where I live, I have been able to find a few different companies that are helping me to remove the invasive plants by hand, but I've also found some companies that are very diligent in the way that they use chemicals in the least harmful ways possible. You just have to do a little bit of networking and weaving to find which companies will help you out the best. But they do exist, they are out there. You can oftentimes get recommendations for companies that are good in your area by visiting local botanical gardens where you live and just talking to people that work there. They will point you in the right direction. Now, once you've actually removed those invasive plants, what do you do with that removed plant material? There's not a ton of options. You can either chip it and actually create a mulch, which is going to be helpful for your garden in and of itself, or you can burn it, which is a lot of work, but definitely effective. You just never want to add invasive plant life to your compost piles. And if you have just a little bit of invasive plant material, what you can also do is you can, in the middle of the summer, if you're removing it in the summertime, let it sit out in the sunlight for about a month, getting nice and hot and kind of burning from the inside out. Then just add it to your trash, to your garbage, and let the garbage men take it out. And that's a-okay, perfectly fine, just if you have small quantities of that material. All right, so now that you know what they are, why they're bad, and how to remove them, it's time to start creating an action plan to remove all of these destructive, harmful, invasive plants from your garden, so then you can then go forth and add some much more beautiful, helpful, eco-friendly plants to your landscape. And if you are a go-getter and you enjoy this type of content, check this video out about how to make your very own leaf compost. It's easy to do, just takes a little bit of patience, but it's one of the best ways to inexpensively add a wonderful free soil conditioner to your garden beds. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me here on Plant Vibrations. I'll catch you soon. Ciao.